Costume design is subjective, to a degree. But of course there are things such as good choices, bad choices, and even what the heck is this choices. When it comes to the Rings of Power, whether we like it or not, whether we think it's fair or not, the series is always going to be compared to the Lord of the Rings trilogy. Many people have this idea of Tolkien's world based on the Lord of the Rings movies. Does that mean that everything has to look just like the Lord of the Rings in the future Tolkien prequels, sequels, and spin-offs? No, absolutely not. But as I said, there are good and not so good choices. And for a series with a huge budget, the Rings of Power Season 1 costumes leave quite a lot to be desired. I covered the topic of the Rings of Power costumes quite extensively back in the day. Many of you have been with me since the beginning. So when I saw this article, I decided to give it a read, of course, and see what the Rings of Power costume designers and crew had to say about their creative process. A quick shout out to European Lore for putting this article on my radar. I would not have found it without him. He covered it in one of his videos quite a while back. But I'm still here with my 2 cents. So let's dive in and see what these 11 cool facts are. Are they really that cool, and do they explain any of the costume choices? Fact number 1. The team had to remake Galadriel's shipwreck dress over 70 times. We made about 70 versions of Galadriel's undergarment that she wore on the boat. We had to do several tests in the pool, and the chlorine took out all the color, so we'd go back and create another version. We also did a few different versions with various lengths to get the underwater shots right. At the beginning, we'd done all kinds of hand embroidery and pearls on the garment, but we ended up scaling that back a bit to keep the revisions from getting out of control. You might not realize it, but this repeated work is common in action-heavy shows and films. We had to get clever to make sure we stayed on top of the timeline for several characters. Okay, so yeah, this is pretty standard practice for big budget movies, fantasy movies.
We had to make the lead actor's costume 10 times, and then we had to make the body double's costume 10 times, and then we had to make the mini-me costume 10 times, and then we had to make the stunt double costume 10 times. So there are about 40 costumes of that one design.
What saddens me, however, is the fact that they cut down on the embroidery, because what we were left with, is this rather plain night shift night dress, which is such a shame because the dress shows up a lot, it has a lot of screen time, and this would be the perfect opportunity to showcase some artistry and skill. It's Galadriel's going to Valinor dress, and on the one hand I appreciate the simplicity, but on the other hand, I think it's just such a missed opportunity. This isn't some small budget production with no materials, supplies, and people to create garments. It's Amazon, so it just comes across as, yeah, we could have done this and this and that, but we took the easier way. Fact number 2. The costumes were designed to meet the characters at various stages in their development. A big part of filling in the gaps meant understanding the individual characters and where their races were in their evolution. Then I worked backwards to determine what they might look like at the time. The dwarves were in their golden age, the Harfoots were trying to find a home, and the Númenóreans were in a time where they were perceived as godlike beings. The elves were not as perfect in this era as they are when we see them 6,000 years later in the Third Age. I thought there was an opportunity to tell the story of time with garments that had a certain age to them. Okay, let's break this down. So they claim the Harfoots were trying to find a home. So yeah, hobbits aren't even supposed to be in this age. This is Amazon's edition. And secondly, Amazon depicted them as migratory people. So they're migrating every so often. They're not actively looking for a home, though, to settle down permanently, as far as I remember. And then they state the elves were not as perfect as 6,000 years later. What? I get that they wanted to depict them differently than the elves in Lord of the Rings, but the elves in the Third Age are basically a dying race. They're pretty much leaving Middle Earth. How is that more perfect? Other than these confusing things, well, yeah, you do tell a story with garments. Mention this by all means, but as the main topic of the article, I'm missing a few concrete examples. Like, how does a particular garment from the show tell a story? What kind of story? What about it is telling a story? The whole paragraph is saying a lot, but actually nothing. If you're telling me cool facts about movie costumes, I want to hear things like Viggo Mortensen asked how Aragorn keeps his sword sharp, so they decided to give his character a whetstone as part of his costume. Things like that.
On arriving at Weta, he said to me, "So how would I keep it sharp?"
I asked for a sharpening stone. I mean, you need to sharpen your sword now and then.
So indeed we went ahead and cast up a little urethane replication of a whetstone, so that in theory, Strider could sharpen the edge of his sword.
Fact number 3. Historic paintings helped guide the look and feel of the Second Age. I found myself using paintings for inspiration a lot because Tolkien was very influenced by pre-Raphaelite artists, especially Sir Edward Colley Burne-Jones and William Morris. I looked at some of the darker symbolist paintings as a reference, as well as the Nordic and Germanic mythologies and the Old English era with King Arthur and his Knights of the Round Table. The overarching theme was to return to the place of origin and creation. It's like a rupture. We kept treating each scene as a painting to bring together elements like the costumes, hair and makeup, set, design, and props. Okay, so they list the pre-Raphaelites, symbolism, Nordic and Germanic, Old English. Okay, there's a lot. It's all over the place, but that's not to say that you can't have a mix of influences, especially, for different races and things like that in fiction. I'm not an expert on any of these eras, but now that I'm hearing it, I can actually see the pre-Raphaelite inspiration that they're mentioning. Maybe in scenes like this, and this, and this one. They got the general vibe. I'll give them that. It's a bit odd that they're taking inspiration from such, from eras that are so far apart in history. But there is substance to this paragraph, and I can see what they're talking about. If I look at the series, I can find what they're describing here. So, okay, fair enough. Fact number 4. I'm not gonna bore you by reading this. You can read it on your own if you want. But basically, they're saying they had a huge storyboard to keep track of all the cultures and characters in their show. Yeah, makes sense. Fact number 5. There were specialists making handmade armor, jewelry, shoes, and lace on set. Okay, this should be interesting. Our in-house team started small, then eventually grew as production progressed. We had artists who specialized in armor, jewelry, and custom lace, as well as a full shoe department. Even had a professional in weaving who wove parts of the Harfoots' costumes. Every culture brought in a new discipline. More elaborate costuming for some characters often required support from many of them at the same time. Okay, so you're telling me you had specialists that made this, or this, or this? Okay, I'm not saying this is a lie, but here's the thing. I am 99% sure that somewhere down the line, something went wrong, or cuts were made or something. Maybe they had specialists, but they only gave them a certain amount of time, or put them on a tight budget where they only had, enough budget to work with certain types of materials. If that's the case, even experts will only be able to deliver so much. And I think it's likely that there was some miscommunication between departments. Maybe people in charge of the elves' costumes had no clue what the people in charge of the Numenorians were doing. I don't know, I'm not sure, this is just my speculation, but I'm pretty sure that somewhere in that chain, from the concept to the making of the costume, to having the finished product in the show, somewhere there was a disconnect. My 2 cents. Fact number 6, we're already halfway through. Elven cloaks were dyed to perfectly match the environment around them. So here they just talk about dyeing, hand dyeing, different fabrics, different costumes, trial and error, things like that. Galadriel's golden green dress that they mention, that gold stitching, that was really nice. The dark green velvet cloak, that was one of the nicer garments, and I really loved how they included it, how they matched it into... It looked very much like it's part of the forest, and that was beautiful. I'll give them credit where credit is due. As far as everything else goes, I mean, yeah, they dyed the costumes, it took a lot of trial and error to get the color right. It's good that they did it, but particularly interesting, does it earn a spot on this list of 11 cool facts? That's what I'm questioning. Shall it pass, or shall it not? Fact number 7. It was a delicate balance to create armor that was not only beautiful, but functional too. We can't just make beautiful things out of steel, even though I would have really loved to. This show requires real articulated armor because the stunt work is so physical. For example, Arondir scenes are so physical that we needed to create armor that would allow Ismael Cruz Cordova to perform. Someone was always coming to me saying, Kate, we have to be sensible in this a bit, and I would be conflicted creating a version that was practical but also beautiful. So they mentioned Arondir's armor. But, what about some other things? If the armor were made with functionality in mind, then would you really have to print on chainmail, scale mail, onto Numenorian armor? Would you put chainmail directly on the skin of the elves? Would you put the elves who were climbing that icy wall with winds howling all around them? Would you put them in super lightweight capes that will not keep them warm, but will ensure that they can trip more easily or get stuck while they're climbing that icy wall? Yes, much beauty, such functional. Fact number 8. They had to shrink images of the dwarfs down to make sure the costumes would appear as they wanted on screen. I'm not sure what this paragraph has to do with the costumes. I mean, yeah, you look at the proportions of the person that you're making the costume for, maybe you consider how that's gonna work on a smaller scale, but yeah, obviously they had to shrink the dwarves down a bit. I don't get why this paragraph is here. Fact number 9. Film technology is so advanced it sometimes picked up issues that the naked eye or ear didn't catch. So for this one, they basically just say they had to ensure that the camera wasn't picking up on fabric sounds, that nothing was jangling, and so on. Fact number 10. Showrunners J.D. Payne and Patrick McKay specifically requested Bronwyn's red cape. Bronwyn is the healer of her village, so the clothes and capes she wore were typically meant to match the atmosphere around her. When we were creating the battle sequence, the directors really wanted her to stand out, so they asked for a red cape. Healers were like the nurses on the battlefield, so this red cape helped pull her out. Okay, so here we get one specific detail. It's nice if the red cape was a symbolic choice. I have no issue with that. Maybe give her the cape from the start then, because she didn't become a healer then and there on that battlefield. Wasn't it important to symbolize that she was a healer also beforehand? Why is it so relevant that we specify that she's a healer on the battlefield but not single her out? Even though she kind of was singled out, she had a little bit more of that blue in her village versus, 50 Shades of Grey of the rest of the villagers. Also, how did she get the cape in the context of the show? Did the Numenorians just bring spare red capes for any potential healers that might need a symbolic medic's red cape? Okay, are you still with me? Here's the last fact. Fact number 11. The costumes were a metaphor for the poetry of Tolkien's writing. Okay, let's give this one a go. The biggest thing I learned in this process was to trust the poetry of Tolkien's work. That's what makes it so different from other fantasy franchises. For example, he describes heroes covered in the dust of diamonds, and it was exciting to try things like adding hundreds of rhinestones to the elven armor to try to visualize these words. I really wanted to create movement and light that reflected his text as a metaphor through the costumes. Then the incredible visual effects followed to create a new world. Okay, look. Some of the scenes, especially of the elves, were very nice visually. No denying that. First things first. Where were the rhinestones on the armor? Did they mean this armor? I have no idea. But they're being so vague yet again. create movement and light that reflected Tolkien's text as a metaphor through the costumes. It feels like they're saying what they think we want to hear, in the sense of, we went back to the book, back to the book. Is there anything more substantial, more concrete? Like, I don't know. Tolkien described female dwarves as being just like the male dwarves, and all male dwarves have beards. Therefore, it was important for us to depict that via the costumes and makeup. None of that? Okay, how about the fact that Tolkien's elves have long hair? Was that important to reflect through the costumes? No? Okay. That's all for today's video. Thank you guys for watching and for being a part of our little community. If you haven't yet, don't forget to subscribe and leave a comment down below. Share your thoughts about the whole Rings of Power costume situation. As always, take care, and I will see you soon.
He is always right!